Chapter 1: The Archivist. The first mistake was thinking it was just a story. His name was Julien Marr, and he considered himself a man of reason. A traveling archivist and restoration scholar, 32 years old, with a fondness for dead languages and ruined chapels. When the letter arrived at his Paris flat, sealed in cracked red wax, and signed, he assumed it was a hoax. The relic sleeps in Saint-Idivane, not buried, only waiting. It sings when touched. Julien had never heard of the place, but he couldn't stop thinking about it. Saint-Idivane wasn't on any map. He tried the British archives, found nothing. He traced railway lines from old industrial towns into dead counties, compared old parish records with forest clearings. For weeks, he saw the name in his dreams, spoken by a woman with red ribbons in her hair, whose lips never moved. Eventually, he found it, not on paper but in rumor, a patch of moor in North Devon, whispered of by rural folk with clouded eyes and mouths too tight with old grief. A ruin, they said, a church that no longer remembered what it worshipped. Julien packed a single satchel, kissed no one goodbye, and vanished into the fog. He reached the edge of the moor at dusk. The fog clung low, swallowing the road behind him. Grass stretched in every direction, rippling with wind that sounded almost like breath. His phone had died 5 miles back. No signal, no GPS, just his notebook, the wax-sealed letter, and a sense of certainty he couldn't justify. Took him 3 hours to find it. One moment there was only mist. The next, the ruin loomed before him. It was exactly as described. Half-buried stone, a roof long fallen, ivy twisted like veins across charred walls. Yet something about the structure felt preserved, not untouched by time but watched over by it. Inside, the floor had cracked with roots. Pews were reduced to skeletal fragments. But at the far end of the nave, on a raised dais of red-veined stone, sat the reliquary. It was smaller than he imagined. Blackened, gilt-edged, 5 wax seals, each bearing a strange symbol, flesh-like in shape, vaguely human. He didn't breathe as he approached. Didn't dare. He touched it, and something deep in the ruin exhaled. The seals trembled. Wax shivered. Not broken, but aware. Julien pulled his hand back sharply, heart hammering. He knelt, pulled out his notebook, and began sketching the sigils. He copied them carefully, precisely, humming softly to calm his nerves. Then, as he shaded the last glyph, he heard a sound behind him. A whisper. No breath, no laughter. He turned. No one. Only dust and stone and something far too warm for this place. He stayed the night. A storm kept him pinned. Thunder cracked above like a war drum. Rain fell so heavy it sounded like weeping. He laid his coat near the reliquary. He couldn't explain why. It just felt proper. He dreamed of a woman in red. She stood in the doorway of the ruin, veil billowing behind her like smoke. Her eyes glowed faintly, and when she lifted her hand, the bones beneath her skin shifted like ink in water. She spoke only one word. Soon. Julien awoke in a fever. The storm had passed, but the relic pulsed faintly in the morning light. Not visibly, viscerally, like a heartbeat echoing through stone. He approached again. No voice, no reaction. But when he opened his journal, the glyphs he had drawn had changed. Shifted subtly, curved inward like petals. A 6th had appeared in the corner of the page. He didn't remember drawing it. It looked like an eye. He took the reliquary with him, packed it carefully in his satchel. It was heavier than it looked, like it carried more than mass. When he stepped outside the ruin, the wind stilled. Not a leaf stirred. Birds stopped calling. He turned once, looking back. The ruin felt smaller now, quieter, as if it had handed him something and gone to sleep. He did not notice the footprints in the mud behind him, bare, delicate, following. By the time he reached the next town, Julien's fever had passed. He checked into a small inn under a false name. In the privacy of his room, he laid out the reliquary, his sketches, and a portable recorder. He planned to document everything. But when he pressed record, all it captured was breathing. Not his not human. That night he dreamed again. This time the woman stood closer. She touched his cheek, whispered, "The seals must learn you." Chapter 2. The First Petal. Julien left the inn the next morning without remembering why. He woke at dawn, packed the reliquary and his notebook, paid the old man at the front desk with coins that hadn't been minted in decades, and walked for miles without a destination. He didn't recall making those choices, only feeling them, a pressure in the back of his mind like a hand guiding him by the neck. By late afternoon, he arrived at an abandoned vicarage on the edge of a wooded hollow. Crows circled overhead. He broke the lock on the door and made it his study. He never thought to leave. The reliquary sat on the floorboards like a shrine. He lit candles around it, not out of superstition but necessity. Electricity here was unreliable. The wind howled at night, and the forest behind the house creaked like shifting bones. Each evening he sat before the box and studied the wax seals. They were changing. The first seal, the one marked by a kiss-shaped glyph, began to soften. It did not crack or melt, but loosened, as though the wax had grown warm. It breathed gently beneath his fingers, and when he brushed it once, carelessly, he felt a sensation so tender and intimate it made his eyes burn. Lips, not kissing, sighing. He did not touch it again. But at night the dreams returned. In the dream he was in a bedroom he did not recognize. Velvet wallpaper, oil lamps flickering low. On the bed sat the woman in red. Her veil was gone. Her face was Clara's, though he did not know the name. Pale skin, crimson eyes, mouth full of sad knowing. She extended her arms. "Open the first," she said. "Let it learn you." Julien stepped forward. But before he could reach her, she vanished, and the reliquary sat on the bed in her place, trembling. He woke at midnight, sweating. The air in the room was thick with perfume, sweet, earthy, like dying roses. He looked to the reliquary. The first seal had cracked. Just a hairline fracture across the wax, gleaming faintly in the candlelight. Julien whispered, "No." But it wasn't a refusal. It was awe. That day he began hearing voices. Not speech, not even language, just the shape of desire coiling in the back of his thoughts. When he worked, it whispered of rest. When he slept, it whispered of skin. When he stood before the mirror, it whispered of who he might become if he let go of what he was. The first petal was blooming. He called it that now, the kiss-shaped seal. Petal. There would be more. Julien wrote feverishly in his notebook, "The reliquary is not a prison. It is a womb. The seals are not locks. They are lures. Each is a mask for a part of the self too sacred to name aloud. The first wants to know how I touch, how I ache." He tried to leave the house that evening, just to walk, to think, but his feet refused. Instead, he stood before the reliquary and stared at it for hours, unmoving. At some point, the candle burned out. Still he watched. On the third night, the dream changed. No longer a bedroom. Now, the abbey, ruined, flooded in moonlight. Clara stood at the altar, veiled once more. And this time, Sebastian was beside her. Older, worn, crowned in ash. He turned to Julien and said, "If you open it without giving, it will not love you. If you give too much, it will not leave you." Julien asked, "What do I give?" Clara replied, "Your first truth." He woke weeping. The air was warm. The reliquary was glowing. The first seal had fallen. It lay curled beside the box like a red petal from a burned rose. Inside the cavity left behind, there was no mouth, no tongue, no relic, only a mirror. And in it, Julien saw a version of himself, bare-chested, radiant, mouth open in ecstasy or pain. Around his neck, a red ribbon. On his lips, blood. Then nothing. He did not sleep for the next 2 days. Every candle in the house burned with a red flame. He tried to write, but only scratched the same word across pages. Touch. On the third night, he spoke aloud. "Clara, if you're there." Nothing. Then, a whisper behind him. "Soon." The second seal stirred. This one bore a crown-shaped glyph. Chapter 3, The Second Crown. The crown-shaped seal awakened with a pulse. Julien felt it before he saw it, like pressure behind his eyes, a golden ache, a tightness in his skull, as if something above him were pressing down, heavy with unseen weight. The seal glimmered faintly, just once. Then it darkened again. But that single flicker was enough to set something in motion. Julien wandered the ruined vicarage like a man half-possessed. His dreams had become unreliable, half memory, half intrusion. Waking life and nightmare bled together now, and he wasn't sure when one ended and the other began. Every time he passed the reliquary, he bowed his head, not out of reverence, but reflex. He hated himself for it. He tried to leave again, but his boots had rooted to the floor. The second seal was not gentle. Commanded. Where the first had lured with touch and ache, the second probed deeper, into pride, desire for control, for legacy. Julien spent hours gazing into the reliquary now. Sometimes it reflected him. Sometimes it did not. And once it reflected someone else. He was scribbling in his notebook late at night when he glanced into the reliquary's mirror panel and saw himself, but regal, cloaked in black and crimson, a crown of bone atop his head, eyes rimmed in red gold. The crown. Julien said nothing. He only raised one hand and pointed. To the mirror. To himself. Julien snapped the notebook shut and fell back from the box, gasping. His skin burned where the vision had touched his mind. The reliquary was glowing again. Subtly, steadily. The second seal had cracked. That night, the woman in red returned to his dreams. Clara stood on a dais, the ruined abbey behind her, her body clothed in thorn and silk. Around her hovered 5 crowns, each forged of different hungers. Lust, guilt, grief, envy, and something Julien couldn't name. "I don't want power," he told her. She smiled. "Then give it up." He woke at dawn, shaking. He found himself kneeling before the reliquary again. The second seal was hot to the touch, though the air was cold. He forced himself to whisper, "You can't have me." And from the reliquary came a whisper, not spoken but implied. "You already gave yourself to the idea." Julien didn't leave the vicarage for a week. He fasted, burned his notes, tried to pray, though he did not believe. But each day, the seal deepened its fracture. Each hour, it demanded more. At night, he heard his own voice whispering from inside the mirror. "You want to be remembered. You want to matter." He screamed. That was the first time the reliquary flinched. Julien wrote, "I see now this isn't about worship. It's about what we build altars to, even in private. I made a cathedral out of my fear of insignificance. The reliquary doesn't demand blood. It wants identity." On the 7th day, he placed the crown of his shame on the floor. An actual object, fashioned crudely from bent iron and black ribbon. It was symbolic, ridiculous, and absolutely necessary. He knelt. "I offer this," he said, "my desire to be more than I am, to be admired, to be remembered for something I never earned." The reliquary responded with silence. Then, the second seal peeled away. Beneath it, another mirror, no reflection this time. Only a crown suspended in water, slow spinning. It broke apart as he watched, unraveling into dust, into names he almost recognized. Then, nothing. That night, the crowned version of himself returned. But this time, he was bound. Clara stood behind him, cutting away the crown strand by strand. With each piece that fell, the false king wept. With each tear, the real Julien felt lighter. He woke beneath the stars, on the floor of the vicarage. His hands were raw. His voice was hoarse. The reliquary glowed faintly, and beside it lay the second petal, curled and dark. He did not touch it. In the morning, he discovered something new. On the inside of his left wrist, a small red mark. It resembled the same symbol as the first seal. A kiss. On the inside of his right, another, a crown. His body was becoming a map. The third seal now pulsed at the center of the reliquary. It was shaped like a hand. Chapter 4: The Third Touch. Julien knew it before he opened his eyes. The third seal had begun to pulse. He felt it in his bones this time. Not the mind, not the heart, but the joints and marrow. Every part of him that could carry memory without thought. The glyph was a hand, etched in wax like it had been pressed into soft skin. Not reaching, not offering, just there as if waiting for his. The red marks on his wrists hadn't faded. They had darkened overnight. The kiss on the left, the crown on the right. Now a third mark burned on the back of his neck. He felt it before he saw it. A tingling, faintly electric sensation like spider silk and blood. The reliquary knew his body now. Julien wasn't sure if he still did. He spent the day in silence. He didn't write, didn't speak, just moved from corner to corner of the crumbling vicarage, lighting candles and waiting for something unnamed. At dusk, he sat before the reliquary. The third seal had not cracked, but it pulsed with warmth. A steady, rhythmic beat, not unlike a heartbeat. He stared at the hand-shaped glyph and whispered, "Whose hand is this?" From behind him, a voice answered, "Yours." Julien turned. No one. But the air felt thick, as though someone had just stepped out of the room and left their breath behind. That night, the dream returned. Not Clara this time. A room of hands, dozens, reaching from walls of red silk. All shapes and sizes, genderless and twitching. They didn't grab, didn't strike. They simply wanted. To hold, to guide, to remember. And in the center, his own hand, severed and hovering in the dark like an offering, turned toward him and pointed. He woke gasping and found that his real hand was resting on the reliquary, palm pressed flat against the third seal. He yanked it away, but not before feeling the pulse rise to meet his skin, like a lover's response to touch. The wax beneath his palm was slick with heat. A fracture now ran through the seal. Julien didn't sleep the next night. He sat beside the reliquary, trying to understand what this one demanded. The first had been lust, the second power. The third? He thought of touch, but it wasn't carnal. This one was about memory, of every hand he'd shaken insincerely, of every moment he refused to reach out for help, of the time, at 12 years old, when his mother tried to hold him after his father died, and he refused. "I don't need you." The words echoed now like a wound still wet. The third seal pulsed again. Julien dropped to his knees. He whispered, "Then take it. Take every hand I've turned away. Every time I should have held someone and didn't." He pressed both hands to the reliquary. For a moment, no sound. Then something took his hand back. Gently, firmly, warm. The seal cracked down the center and folded open like skin. Inside, this time, there was no mirror. Only a glove, hovering in darkness. Black silk, inside out. It drifted toward him, slow and deliberate. He tried to move. He couldn't. The glove reached him, slipped over his left hand, vanished. He screamed. The glove was gone. But the sensation remained. His hand burned. His wrist flared with light. A third mark now bloomed at his palm center. A red glyph of a hand inside another hand. He could feel everything with that hand now. Not textures, truths. When he touched the reliquary, he felt every soul it had consumed, every gift offered, every plea denied. He pulled away, sobbing. In the mirror, his reflection had changed again. Now, Julien in gray robes, arms outstretched. Behind him, 1,000 hands reaching skyward. His own hand glowed red. He did not look afraid. He looked like a guide. He wrote one sentence in his journal that night. "I have begun to touch what I once ran from." Outside, the wind howled through the trees. The reliquary was silent, but the next seal had begun to throb beneath the wax. It was shaped like a tongue. Chapter 5: The Fourth Voice. The house went still when the fourth seal awoke. No birds, no wind, no creaking rafters or whispering trees. Even the floorboards stopped groaning beneath Julien's steps. Silence fell, not peaceful but expectant. The tongue-shaped seal glowed faintly on the reliquary, a shimmer like candlelight caught in wet ink. Julien didn't need to touch it to know what it wanted. It wasn't after sound. It wanted language. He sat cross-legged before the reliquary, knees aching, sweat beading at his temples despite the chill. He hadn't spoken aloud in 2 days. It wasn't out of fear, it was protection. He sensed it in his jaw, his throat. Any word he said now would carry weight, would be heard. Even thinking too loudly made his tongue itch. In the mirror, his reflection was gone again, replaced by a mouth. Just that, open wide, lips pale, black tongue curled like a question mark. It didn't speak. It waited. He wrote in his journal, "This seal isn't about truth. It's about what truth costs. It wants me to say it. Not what I know, not what I believe, what I swore I'd never say again." He closed the journal, lit a single red candle, and remembered, years ago, before the reliquary, before Clara, before the fever dreams, Julien had spoken something cruel to someone he loved. It was a petty fight, nothing dramatic, passing fury, but the words had echoed. "You're weak. You need to be worshipped. That's why no one stays." He'd said them to hurt, and they had stuck. He never apologized. They never spoke again. Now, seated before the reliquary, he felt those words coiling in his throat again. But not his voice. Hers. The one he had hurt. He opened his mouth, and she spoke through him. "I would have followed you through fire, but you made me feel like a shadow. I gave you everything, and you called it clinging." Julien gasped, hand over his mouth. The reliquary glowed brighter. The fourth seal cracked. Hairline only, but enough. He understood now. This was the voice of the wound, the things spoken in rage or fear or desire that never left the air around them. The reliquary remembered every word. It demanded he speak one he had buried. So Julien whispered, "I was wrong. You were enough. I left because I was afraid to be seen. I used cruelty as a veil. I'm sorry." The candle flickered violently. The seal peeled open. From inside rose not a mirror, not a symbol, a sound. A soft, continuous chant. Dozens of voices, layered, repeating the same phrase in languages Julien didn't know, yet understood. "Give it voice. Let it live. Give it voice. Let it live." The sound filled the room. Then his mouth moved again. Not by choice. He stood, arms trembling, and spoke in a language that felt like fire and velvet and knives. He did not know what he said, but something did. The chant stopped. Julien collapsed to his knees, sobbing. His tongue burned, literally. When he opened his mouth, the tip glowed red. On it, a faint glyph, like a brand or a kiss from within. The fourth mark had been made. He ran to the mirror in the hallway. His reflection stared back, changed again. Now he stood amid a crowd of eyeless people, mouths open, waiting. Julien raised his hand and spoke. They wept. He wrote, "There is a power in words once buried." The reliquary doesn't ask for sermons. It asks for confession. Not for absolution, but transmutation. The reliquary had gone dark again. But the fourth petal lay beside it, curled and damp with what looked like ink and tears. He did not pick it up, only knelt, silent once more until morning. By sunrise, the final seal pulsed at the center of the box. This one was shaped like a mouth full of teeth. Chapter 6. The Fifth Hunger. The final seal pulsed without mercy. It bore no delicate shape, no crown, kiss, or hand. Only a crude mouth carved into black wax, its many teeth uneven, jagged, open wide in permanent appetite. Julien sat before it, exhausted. His tongue still ached from the fourth mark. His body bore 4 sigils now. Wrist, hand, neck, tongue, each still warm, each occasionally throbbing as if echoing a pulse not his own. This seal was different. The others had asked for parts of him. This one wanted all of him. He barely slept. When he did, he dreamed of digestion. Bones crushed between invisible jaws. Souls unraveling in fire. A church with no doors, only mouths. And he walked endlessly through corridors of teeth that spoke his name. At the center of it all sat the reliquary. Not closed, not sealed, but open. An impossible throat spiraling down, red and endless. Waiting. When he woke, the hunger was already inside him. Not for food, not for touch or power or voice. A hunger to be emptied, to give everything, to let the reliquary eat what remained. Julien tried to resist. He burned the last of his journals, packed the reliquary in its cloth shroud, took it into the woods and buried it beneath a dead tree. Then he walked, for hours. But when he returned, it was in the house again, sitting calmly on the table where it had always been, seals still intact. Waiting. The fifth one gleamed faintly. The reliquary had never laughed before. But that night, when Julien collapsed before it, crying, it gave him a sound like laughter. Not cruel, not warm, just inevitable. He sat there for hours, whispering to himself, trying to name the hunger. And finally, he found the truth of it. I don't want to be consumed, he said. I want to be known, completely, even if it kills me. The reliquary glowed red. The seal cracked. Julien didn't sleep again. Not for 2 days. He didn't need to. He began to feel outside time, his breath sinking with something larger, his pulse aligning with the boxes. He knew now. The reliquary didn't destroy. It distilled. It was the crucible of longing, of fear, of the unspoken. And he was its final confession. On the third day, he whispered, I'm ready. The fifth seal peeled away. The room went dark. What came out was not a mirror, not a voice, not a vision. It was a hunger given shape. Julien felt it rise, within him, around him. His skin rippled with it. His spine stretched. His breath staggered and tore. He wasn't becoming anything. He was being unmade. Like iron in a forge, like paper in flame, like old prayers remembered only by fire. He screamed, and the reliquary sang. When it was done, he knelt, skin smoking, hands trembling. But alive. Changed. The fifth mark now burned across his chest. A red mouth, teeth curled inward. He had not been devoured. He had devoured the reliquary. It sat before him now, cold, quiet, empty. The seals were gone. His mirrors dull. Its voice silent. And yet, he felt it within himself, stitched into his ribs, his breath, his thoughts. Julien Marr, archivist and unbeliever, was now the reliquary's final vessel. In the mirror, he saw himself clearly, cloaked in red and gray, eyes soft with sorrow, mouth closed, but inside infinite. He wrote the last line of his final page. It never wanted to take. It waited for someone willing to give it shape. I was not its prey. I was its language. The vicarage collapsed that night in a storm. Locals later reported no sign of fire or flood. Only a strange red light in the trees, and a single figure walking from the wreckage with bare feet and a distant stare. He carried no relic. But where he walked, people dreamed strange things. The reliquary was not seen again. Not as a box. But its marks began to appear on those who confessed too deeply, who dreamed of veils and voices, who whispered secrets to mirrors and found the mirror whispering back. It has no shape now, only a message, only a man who walks the world, carrying it within. Chapter 7. The Saint of Hunger. They call him a saint now, not in churches, not in hymns, but in whispers, in dreams, in tremors. They never say his name, only that he walks without shadow and speaks with a voice not entirely his own. That he appears in ruins, abandoned places, the last pew of a burned chapel. And when he speaks, you remember the one thing you tried to forget. And when he touches you, it stays remembered. Julien did not know where he walked anymore. He moved through cities and forests like smoke, no money, no direction, no past. The reliquary had reshaped his soul. And now the world bent subtly around him. Doors opened, lights flickered, candles lit themselves. But the hunger remained. Not his exactly, but something inside him. Something that waited. He wore red now, not as costume but necessity. The cloak had appeared one morning, folded at the foot of a ruined bell tower. Dustless, warm, familiar. The moment he draped it across his shoulders, the wind ceased, and the dreams resumed. In sleep, he no longer saw Clara. Not directly, only the shape of her veiled silhouette on the horizon, walking ahead of him, always out of reach, always turning a corner, always leading him to someone new, because that's what he did now. He found those who had been wounded by want, and he offered them a choice. The first was a widow, aged, silent, lived alone in a derelict cottage by the cliffs of Brittany. He found her weeping in the yard. She said her husband still sat in his chair, weeks dead, skin gray and eyes glassy, refusing to rot. Julien stepped inside. The corpse turned to look at him. It whispered, "You are hollow." Julien knelt and placed one hand over its chest. When he pulled away, the eyes closed, and the wife said nothing. But when she woke the next day, the red kiss mark had appeared on her wrist. The second was a child, blind since birth, but painted things she couldn't have seen. Images of the reliquary, of Julien, of Clara. He touched her forehead once. She smiled and said, "Your mouth is full of stars." Word spread not by mouths but through instinct. A pull, a dream, a sound behind the wall, a red ribbon beneath a pillow, and then Julien would appear, always when needed, never twice in the same place. He asked no payment. He left no relic, only marks, and sometimes transformation. But with each offering, Julien felt the hunger grow louder. It didn't roar, cooed, like a parent to a child, like a song that refused to end. It whispered in his mind when he knelt, sang when he bled, laughed when he trembled. "We are not done," it would say. "You are not finished." And Julien began to forget his own name, his family, his first kiss, the color of his own eyes. Even Clara's voice, once so vivid, became muffled in memory. He wrote her name in the dirt once, watched the wind blow it away, felt nothing, then wept for what he could no longer feel. He asked the hunger, "What am I now?" It replied, "You are the reliquary, given breath, the vessel of memory, made flesh, the final psalm made walking." Julien whispered, "Am I still a man?" The reliquary pulsed inside him, and answered, "You are what remains of one." Some say he's still wandering. A few say he returned to Saint-Divine, that the ruin welcomed him home, and the reliquary reassembled itself beneath the altar. But those are stories. What is known is this: wherever he walks, red flowers bloom in strange places. Mirrors distort, old wounds ache, and those who dream of veiled women wake with blood in their mouth and tears on their chest. And peace. Julien Marr is no longer spoken of in books, but his marks remain in every soul who gave something they could never name. And if you see a man in red in the corner of a forgotten chapel, you don't ask for a blessing. You ask quietly, "What have I buried?" And if he smiles, you're not alone anymore. Chapter 8. The Reliquary Reborn. It ended where it began, not with fire or thunder, but with stillness. A forest glade, buried deep in some nameless country. Trees stood like sentinels. Moonlight turned the leaves pale silver. Wind moved, but the branches did not stir. In the center of the glade stood Julien, or what remained of him. He no longer dreamed, not in the way he once had. The reliquary had eaten his sleep, had hollowed it out and replaced it with remembrance. Other people's memories, other people's sins. He bore them like saints bear wounds, silently, unapologetically, beautiful in their decay. His cloak was heavier now, not with dust, but with history. He waited. 3 nights. No food, no movement, just silence and the moon. Then, as if in response to some private clock, Clara arrived. She emerged from the trees without sound. Her veil was gone, her hair crowned in thorns, her skin pale as bone but unmarred. She moved like mist, like memory, like absolution wearing a woman's shape. Julien knelt, not in reverence, but recognition. "You've come back," he whispered. Clara nodded once. "No," she said softly. "You finally arrived." They sat together at the center of the glade. She placed her hand over his chest, where the fifth mark still pulsed, a red mouth of jagged teeth now quiet. "You carried it well," she said. "Did I become it?" he asked. "You became what it wanted to be." He turned away. "Then there's nothing of me left." She smiled. "Oh, Julien, you were never meant to survive this." They spoke until the stars dimmed. Clara told him what the reliquary had once been. Not a curse, not a prison, a seed, created by mouths too old to name. It was planted in grief, fed with shame, watered with longing, buried beneath the bones of saints and sinners alike. "And now?" he asked. "Now," she said, "you are the soil." The earth shifted. Julien looked down. A bloom was rising between his feet, dark crimson petals, spiraling open like a slow wound. Each one bore a different glyph: kiss, crown, hand, tongue, mouth. Clara rose to her feet and took a single step back. "You are not its end," she said. "You are its beginning." Julien stood. The flower at his feet pulsed with heat, and from within it something began to form. Not a relic, not a box, a body, shaped like a child, genderless, ageless, skin of red glass and breath like incense. It opened its eyes and spoke. "What is my name?" Julien wept. For the first time in a long, long time. "You don't need one," he said. "You are the reliquary made new." Clara placed a hand on the child's shoulder. What was sealed now walks. What was silent now sings. What was waiting now becomes. She turned to Julien one last time. "You were not devoured. You were chosen." Then she was gone. Petals on the wind. Julien took the child's hand. It pulsed with the warmth of every confession he'd ever heard. The hunger was gone. In its place was something deeper. Clarity. They walked from the glade together, barefoot, silent. Where they passed, flowers opened, mirrors cracked, and somewhere, in 1,000 separate places, forgotten mouths whispered a single word. "Remember." Epilogue. In a church that has no name, where no gods ever lived, there stands an altar made of root and ash. Sometimes, if you kneel there in silence, a voice will whisper in your ear. Not your voice, but a familiar one. It will say, "You are not broken. You are only becoming." And somewhere nearby, the reliquary smiles.